Hello and welcome to Stage Door Live, a brand new web programme for the community of artists here in Ireland. My name is Amy Kidd, I'm an actor and I'll be your host this evening. When the director Kevin Michael Reid came to me and he said that he thought he wanted to create a space where you could get all of the latest headlines and hot topics from the arts community in one place, I thought that it was a great idea. So every week I'll be giving you a little news roundup of arts-related hot topics, and I'll be speaking with some guest speakers that live and work here in Ireland. We hope you enjoy the show. Tonight I'll be talking to Aisling Byrne, Artistic Director of Run of the Mill Theatre and co-founder of Talking Shop Ensemble, along with Medb Lambert, Artistic Coordinator of Equinox Theatre and Co-Artistic Director of Asylum Productions. We'll then be joined by actor Eleanor Walsh, who was in the groundbreaking What I Don't Know About Autism by Jodie O'Neill, and more recently featured in Dear Island in Sinead Burke's These Four Walls. Lastly, we'll be speaking with actor and theatre maker Shane O'Reilly, whose work has amplified the voices of those people in our society that aren't often represented on the Irish stage. I'm Amy Kidd, and this is Stage Door Live for the 3rd of June 2020. Welcome everyone. Before I start with our planned show, there is something important that I have to say. So, a week and a half ago, George Floyd, a Black American man, was murdered by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hopefully you all know this by now, but it needs to be said. Protests and marches are taking place in America, here in Ireland, and across the world, demanding change, asking for recognition, and asking for an end to the systematic racism and oppression of Black people. This has sparked arts institutions, buildings, and theatre companies across Ireland and the world to post content supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. Some have supported by pausing their own content, often with the hashtag "the show must be paused." Others have released statements encouraging dialogue within their institution and looking to open wider conversations about diversity and inclusion so that we can all continue to strive for a better industry and contribute to making a better world. All too often in the world, a moment of global outrage flares up suddenly like this, but then the discussion and the conversation fades until the next time that we see some brutal injustice. But the truth is that these injustices are actually happening every single day in our communities. We applaud those organisations that are speaking out, and all of us at theatremaker.ie stand with and support the Black community. Not only now when it seems to be popular, but always. Theatre should reflect the world we live in, and our world is diverse. Words can sometimes be hollow. Sometimes it's hard to find the right words, but we sincerely hope that these conversations do not fade into the background and get lost with the next media headline. We must continue to listen and to learn, and we know that we can all do better. So we ask you now that you will all take a moment with us to reflect, in whatever way you choose to do so. A moment to honour the life of George Floyd and all people who have been unjustly killed. but also to reflect on what you can do, and in hope that we as a human race can find a way forward to end everyday racism that so many in our communities face. Thank you. So, it's hard to believe that it's already June. This is episode 8 of Stage Door Live, and we're very happy to see all of you tuning in for updates on everything happening in the theatre world. A quick thank you to all of our viewers who have followed us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and for our growing YouTube audience. If you haven't already, you can like, subscribe, and follow us so we can keep you updated with all the latest news in Irish theatre. Let's have a look at some of this week's headlines. Some good news on the home front this week is that Cork Midsummer Festival has announced their programme of events, Midsummer Moments. There are 4 ways to engage with the programme, all of which are compliant with the government's current health and safety guidelines. The festival, in its adapted form, runs from the 10th to the 21st of June. And in Dublin, Ensemble, who usually puts on about 200 plays per year in Ireland and abroad, have said that they expect their output for 2020 to be halved due to the coronavirus pandemic. However, in an Irish Times article last week, artistic director Jim Cullerton said he hopes for Ensemble to return to the stage from August 13th, just 3 days after the start of Stage 5 of Ireland's lockdown exit. As always, we'll link to that article where you can read more from Jim Cullerton and his hopes for Ensembles post-lockdown future. And fans of Culture Night will be happy to know that the annual event will be going ahead on Friday, September 18th. A statement on the Arts Council website says, "Current circumstances offer us a unique opportunity to experiment with physically distanced events while moving Culture Night into digital space. It is also a new opportunity for people to engage with Culture Night while at home, while also reaching audiences around the world. We certainly look forward to seeing how Culture Night adapts to the evolving circumstances." More good news for our friends in the film and television industry, which has been given the go-ahead to resume shooting next month as part of Phase 3 of the lockdown exit strategy. Screen Producers Ireland, which represents a number of Irish production companies, is in the process of drawing up a guidance documentary to help clarify health and safety best practices going forward after COVID. Screen Ireland has also launched 2 new mentorship opportunities in advance of production resuming next month. As always, we'll post the relevant links in the video description. In international news, a new recovery plan from sector leaders in the UK indicates that the government needs to invest £300 million for every 3 months of theatre closures in order to ensure the industry's survival in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. The report, which was generated as part of a virtual summit with leaders from the West End creative, leisure and hospitality industries, makes a number of recommendations for government assistance in recovery, including alternatives to social distancing in venues and a timeline for large events to resume in time for holiday pantomimes. And a big headline making waves in the past week comes from New Zealand, who announced on Monday a $175 million relief package for the arts and creative sector. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the industry had been decimated by COVID-19 and that the sector will be hit roughly twice as hard as the rest of the economy. 4 new funds and a job seeker programme for the creative sector are to be set up to help the industry recover, including $70 million over 3 years for a creative arts recovery and employment fund. We'll be sure to share a link with some more information about New Zealand's plans for recovery in the video description. And that is all the headlines for this week. You can check in with us tomorrow for the news that didn't make it, which is one of our weekly blog posts on theatremaker.ie. As always, if you find any value in Stage Door Live, please do consider hitting the like button and sharing this broadcast with your friends and followers. On YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification icon next to it, which looks like a little bell, and that will ensure that you're kept up to date with our future broadcasts and YouTube exclusive content. We really do appreciate your support. We're thrilled to welcome our first guests, Medb Lambert and Aisling Byrne. Medb is the artistic coordinator of Equinox Theatre Company at KCAT Arts Centre and co-artistic director of Asylum Productions, whose most recent production, Big Chapel X, was nominated for several Irish Times Theatre Awards and won for Best Lighting by Paul Keoghan. As a theatre maker, her work focuses on collaboration and inclusion. Aisling Byrne is a theatre artist, educator and lecturer with over 10 years' experience in socially engaged theatre making, inclusive drama practice and community arts. She is artistic director of the award-winning theatre company Talking Shop Ensemble and of Run of the Mill Theatre, a collective supporting people with intellectual disabilities to access theatre arts as artists, makers, participants and audiences. Hello, Medb and Aisling. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello. Do you wanna? Yeah, both say something quickly as a quick mic check moment. I know Medb was having some trouble with rural internet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got you both. Cool. Okay. So
I think so.
I'm gonna start with Medb, and then come to Aisling with the same question. Could you tell me just a little bit about your journey into the realm of inclusive theatre? That was for Medb, sorry. How you came to work in inclusive theatre. Yeah, Medb. Oh, I think we may have lost her with internet. So maybe we'll go to Aisling for the moment.
Sure. How did I find my way into the realm of inclusive theatre? Was that the question?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Medb's lovely frozen face there. It was it's sort of by accident, really. I studied drama and theatre studies in Trinity College, and I got the opportunity to work with the very magnificent Chrissy Poulter, who's a real champion in, I suppose, the whole area of community theatre practice. So that kind of led me to socially engaged theatre per se. And my mum was a nurse in an intellectual disability service provider for years, and she was always saying to me while I was studying that I should come out and do some drama with some of the people that she worked with, and that she thought they'd really get a lot from it and they'd enjoy it. But I was very involved growing up, I suppose, because of my mother's work with working with people with intellectual disabilities in a kind of a voluntary capacity. At a massive, there's a massive disability service provider in my community called St. Raphael's, and as a result, we kind of in our town, we grew up with really, really broad representation of people with disabilities in our community, which I only realised when I was older was quite unusual. And so I eventually decided to assent and go and just do a few drama workshops in this local service provider, St. Rachel's. And I was just immediately drawn to this practice. I realized that there was a whole population of people who had so many amazing stories to tell, but who weren't
Yeah.
actually, in the main, having the opportunity to access opportunities in the arts as such. And so I suppose I never left really. And that little, stint of drama in St. Rachel's became run-of-the-mill theatre a few years later.
Wow. That's great that you grew up with such an awareness and it around you in the community so much. Hopefully one day all communities will be like that. And I
Yes,
think
for
we can
sure.
go back to Maeve. Maeve,
Yay.
how did you
Hello.
come to how's your internet doing? You okay? So
Is it
how did you
working?
come to pardon?
Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, can hear you. So how did you come to work
Great.
in inclusive theatre?
So when I finished, I also and had the privilege of being a student of Chrissy Poulter's. So that, of course, opened a pathway also for me. But I came back to Kilkenny from Dublin
Mm.
with my first playwriting commission from Barnstorm Theatre Company, which was amazing, like straight out of
Amazing.
college. And then that was done, and suddenly I wasn't in Dublin anymore. I was living in rural Ireland, and I saw a job ad for KCAD Arts Centre for a course, which I applied for and got. And I very quickly, it's a really long story as to how, but I very quickly became coordinator. And after 2 years, after 2 years, students were graduating with BTAC level 5 certificates in theatre performance, and were asking, I should say KCAD Arts Centre is an inclusive arts centre
Mm.
for kind of it's for educating and professional development of artists with disabilities and and whoever wants to.
Mm.
Um, so so the graduates of the course then were kind of going, oh, am I an actor now? Will I get an agent? And I didn't have
Mm.
any answers. This is, a good 10 years ago. There was an answer to that question. And what's interesting is, I think, once you start to educate people, to kind of create your own responsibility to go forward with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. When
So
you see
we
there's a lack,
so we
you
started.
then yeah.
Well, suddenly there was all of these actors with level 5 certificates
Mm.
that had nowhere to go. So I created a responsibility to create a theatre company,
Yeah.
and that responsibility continues as you kind of grow and develop. You've got to do bigger and better things.
Hmm. And
So that,
you,
yeah, that's my
Maeve,
story.
Maeve, you work um, specifically in kind of inclusivity focused practices, but you also work kind of across the board in other areas. Do you feel like your work with inclusivity has influenced all of the work that you do in your professional
Oh yeah,
practice?
absolutely. Because, well, as with anything, you take so much learning from any practice.
Mm, yeah.
Have
In
I
what
lost
ways
you?
do you think it's influenced your work?
Um, I think it changes how you are with people, how you treat people, how you collaborate, how
Mm,
you respect someone's voice, how open-minded you are to any kind of difference, matter difference, or a minority group is a minority group. You become, in some ways, it just opens you up completely to, I suppose, a new kind of empathy.
mm, yeah. So, Aisling, I'm going to come back to you. You were
Hmm.
just about to tour a show called making a mark when shutdown hit. So could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, making a mark was kind of our most ambitious piece of work to date at Run of the Mill Theatre, and actually, much like the question that was just put to Maeve there, it was a real example of all areas of my theatre making practice connecting finally in a really cohesive way, because it was a co-production with Talking Shop Ensemble, a company that I run with Sean Dunn and Lisa Walsh, and we make contemporary documentary work. So it was Making a Mark was a contemporary documentary piece of theatre, but it was working with a real life story and a very talented artist with Down syndrome called Mark Smith, who's a long time collaborator of mine, friend, and a member of Run of the Mill. So Making a Mark was probably our most ambitious piece of work to date at Run of the Mill. We premiered at the Dublin Fringe in 2019, where we were delighted to, be received so well. We won some awards. Most importantly, Mark will kill me if I don't say this, he was nominated for Best Performer in the Dublin Fringe. And it was a really a piece of work that we were so proud of and so ready to take all over the world. And I don't say that lightly. We were planning a 9-venue national tour, a stint in Edinburgh, and beyond that, we were kind of in conversation with venues in Australia and America. So this is the little show that could, as far as we're concerned. But unfortunately, all of that has had to be put on pause for now, with an element of uncertainty, but an absolute driving passion that we will make this tour happen no matter what it takes,
Yeah. I'm just going to let both of you and everyone else know, I've just been told by the producer that we just need to pause the show for 1 second. So if everyone could just bear with us, and we'll be back shortly.
No.
Sorry about that, everyone, and to Aisling, sorry about that for in the middle of your answer. Such a shame that Making a Mark had to be paused, but hopefully it will be back up and running eventually. I would love to see it. And now I'm going to go. Yeah. Now I'm going to go back to Maeve. Maeve, could you tell us a bit about the Power Project with Equinox? Mm-hmm.
Experience of refugees. lens of artists with a disability, and
Wow.
so it was written by an Italian documentary filmmaker, taken from interviews with the refugees in each country. So obviously each country has a very different experience with refugees. You know, obviously Greece and Italy have very, very different experience to Ireland and Czech Republic. So it was very interesting to kind of find how we would talk about this so that it would make sense, or find actions. So it's really about, so it's also a show for young people. So it's kind of equating, or it's talking about the idea of migration through the lens of birds have to migrate, and fish have to migrate, and seeds and things migrate, and people migrate because they have to. And it has happened since the dawn of time. So it's really exciting and really gorgeous. Working as we have 4 productions of the same play, and each company has one scene that stays the same, and that tours daily. So we're supposed to be right now doing that.
Great. So what's the plan then? You're coming back to that. Do you have a date for coming back to that, or is that going to be planned when this is we have a clearer idea of international travel and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's all of that. I mean, the EU have given us a 12-month extension on our funding, thankfully, because it was supposed to finish on the 31st of August, or the 30th of August. So we're hopefully going to just place every in the same place in 2021 as it was in 2020. So fingers crossed we can do it.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And Aisling, another question for you. So we've talked a bit on the show kind of generally about getting back into rehearsal rooms and what that's going to look like, but with the perspective that you have and an inclusivity focus, how do you envisage getting back into rehearsal rooms in the current state that we're in with the people that you work with?
Yeah, I think that's probably the question that is keeping us all awake at night a little bit at the moment, and certainly that we're mulling on. I think that a lot will depend on how things unfold in the coming weeks and months, and it's an ever-changing, movable. But I suppose we'd be really, really hopeful that we could potentially get back into somewhat socially distanced rehearsal room from September onwards. That would be like, we're holding on to that hope for now. And we really leaned into kind of the online digital space as a group, and we've been conducting digital workshops with our youth theatre and with a couple of the ensembles that have been more successful than I would have thought they might have been, in terms of and I think it's also elevated the capacity of many of our members to engage with technology that they just mightn't have tried out before, nor have I really. So
we're all learning.
I think all learning. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's been a little bit of a game changer. So I think on a positive note, we'll hopefully take some of that learning forward and explore ways in which we can engage via that medium, and it might even influence some of the work that we're making in terms of moving into different mediums. But we'd be very much hoping that we can begin to get back together in September and kind of survey where the land lies. I mean, as Maeve knows, and we talk about this all the time, we're used sometimes in field to work having a little bit of a longer genesis, and everything takes a little bit longer. And when there's so many barriers facing your collaborators in terms of, making theatre is hard, but, my collaborators surmount so many barriers to get their work to the level that they want it to be. And that takes consistency and practice and rigor, like for any artist. So it'll be a question of getting back together in September and seeing how this long hiatus, this long break has impacted our ongoing projects and our practice. And we may just need to go through a period of just rebuilding and reconnecting. I think that's going to be really important.
And do you have any thoughts and concerns for audiences that might want to engage with whatever socially distanced theatre is able to go on that might have special requirements or access requirements? Do you think they're being catered for or thought about enough?
I don't think they're ever being catered for or thought of enough, you know, pre-COVID whatsoever. But I mean, this could provide an opportunity for us to just kind of take a step back and think about what we want access and inclusion for audiences to really look like. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people, the people that I work with an intellectual disability, not all, but many might fall under that vulnerable category. And so, you know, everything is going to be a little bit longer and everything is going to feel a little bit riskier. And, you know, people are going to be less inclined to, the barriers that an individual with a disability faces to getting to access work and see work in the first place. You know, you add in this additional barrier of a risk that needs to be mitigated, and suddenly the challenge, and it should never be a challenge, but the challenge of getting to go and see something could suddenly become quite insurmountable. And there has been something kind of democratizing about, the making available of work online, although I know there's a million issues with that and problems with that in terms of, what it's doing to the art form and the liveness of it. But we've been having all kinds of conversations and thoughts about how, as an ensemble on Zoom and that, about how it has opened up an access to many of my collaborators to a volume or a body of work that many of the men and women I work with simply would not have had the opportunity to see. Yeah, like we're watching Dead Center shows one evening and, fantastic monologues from the National Theatre. And I mean, it's not a cure-all to say, oh, let's make everything online and that'll solve the access issues. We don't want to alienate people from the live experience either, but it's certainly something to think about as well as just something in the mix,
Yeah, maybe there could be special places online where institutions make this content available for specific groups that don't otherwise have access to it year round. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing to think about. And Maeve, another question for you. Do you have any hopes or expectations for the future of inclusive theatre in Ireland? Maybe anything that you already felt needed to progress, but also with the lens of COVID, kind of how that may have influenced your thinking?
Well, I kind of hope that this has been a time for everybody to stop and reflect and for things to, just to start like rethinking things a little bit and getting a chance to think about the fact that there are people out there who are going to be very, very, very afraid of going to the theatre for much longer than other people might, or or the fact that even Black Lives Matter at the moment, it's got to make you think about what are we missing in terms of representation in our society, not just Black people. There's people with disabilities, like we do any of them on our media, not on our stages and not on our television. And I mean, a really small thing happened for me actually when Dear Ireland was on, and Normal People at the same time, where I just felt this enormous relief watching these Irish faces and voices and telling stories that were kind of about me, and it made me go, oh my God, after weeks and weeks of watching nothing but American or British television, I absolutely drank this in. Then that made me realize, imagine somebody who's been marginalized and invisible and ignored, how important it feels when you really see Mark Smith on stage. me. So that's my hope,
Yeah.
is that, to open up and think about the fact that representation goes far deeper than we can even imagine. It's, and it seems like such a small thing. It's so huge.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my
No.
hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
So
interesting you
true.
say that about normal people in Deer Island. I had a very similar conversation with a friend of mine about her talking about whenever she sees an Irish person on TV and she's like, "Oh, that's like me." And it's something that, I mean, with an English accent, I think all of us in different ways need to be consciously checking our privilege at the moment in a range of ways, in every way that we can experience it. And final
Sure.
question for Aisling. Same question. What are your hopes and your expectations?
Well, I suppose I hope that for me anyway, it felt certainly in the realm of inclusive theatre making that this year, for the first time ever in my experience, it kind of felt like we were pushing on an open door. Really exciting things were happening, from Jodie O'Neill's What I Don't Know About Autism, um, the festival of work that Blue Teapot were putting on as part of Capital of Culture. There was a playwright with an intellectual disability about to make her debut at the Abbey. One of the members of Blue Teapot. There was Making a Mark about to go on a national tour. There was Equinox doing all these amazing, groundbreaking, exciting things with both the Waterboys and Power. And it really felt like we were on the cusp of a moment for inclusive theatre practice in this country. And I just hope that the voices, I hope that the organizations, the stakeholders, the funders, realize that now more than ever, it's important that we platform those voices on our stages and across culture, and that, that this whole sort of pause has added fuel to that fire, and will mean that not only will we pick back up where we left off, but that, there'll be a real hunger to, to hear those voices, so that we'll reach the extent ultimately that I suppose inclusive theatre becomes visible enough as to be unremarkable. If that makes
Yes,
sense.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like you said, there's been positive progress, but we can be hopeful, but we cannot be complacent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
thank you so much to both of you for joining us tonight, for that chat. Sorry about the technical difficulties and the pause,
No problem.
but thank you and good night to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Aisling.
Thanks. So now we're delighted to have a special report with our associate producer, Janice de Broithe, who spoke with Pádraig Naughton, the Executive Director of Arts and Disability Ireland, earlier this week. Let's have a look.
So I'm joined now by Pádraig Naughton, who is the Executive Director of ADI, Arts and Disability Ireland, to have a chat about arts, access and inclusion in Ireland. So thank you, Pádraig, for doing this. It's great to have you on this episode. I think it's really important that you're on this episode, which I'm really excited for. We've got fantastic guests lined up. Pádraig, can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do in the real world with ADI, i.e. a non-COVID world?
Arts and Disability Ireland is a national development and what the Arts Council would call a resource organisation for arts and disability, and we work across the Republic of Ireland. There is a similar organisation in Northern Ireland called the University of the Atypical, based in Belfast. So what we do is we say that we champion the creativity of artists with disabilities and promote inclusive experiences for audiences with disabilities. And that we do in partnership with the arts sector. So what that looks like is we deliver a range of kind of services and activities and events. So we manage on behalf of the Arts Council, Arts and Disability Connect, which is a funding scheme that's only open to individual artists with disabilities for training, mentoring, and the creation of new work. And that's an annual scheme that's now in its 7th year. We also manage and deliver a lot of the access services, particularly audio description and captioning for live theatre. Those are kind of two examples of the work that we do.
You spoke there about providing captioning and audio description and all that kind of stuff. And recently in Ireland, we've seen an increase in that in our theatres with plays like What I Don't Know About Autism and the Board Gosh. A lot of their runs now, they make sure and have an audio described and captioned performance. Do you think that we're on the right track? Do you think that there is an increased awareness and it's being received well? Or do you think we still have a long way to go in Ireland?
I still think we've a long way to go. I'm very pleased that, you know, the Board Gosh have taken on audio description and captioning to the extent that they have, because their shows are very popular. They have very large houses. A lot of people get to see the shows. It's similar to the Abbey. And I do think they are a driver for the service, because when we talk to colleagues in other countries, like for example in New York, over the last decade, they're now beginning to see a lot more off Broadway or shows that are coming to Broadway getting audio described and captioned, and a lot more interest from the audience, because a lot of the audience who haven't been to an audio described or captioned show before haven't probably been going to the theatre in a long time. I remember one of our board members in the past at Arts and Disability Ireland, when we did our first Romeo and Juliet, I think was our first captioned show at the Abbey. And she was telling me that 17 years prior to that, her Leaving Cert class had gone to see the show in the Abbey, but she hadn't gone because she was deaf. So that was her first time to actually see the show. It was accessible to her.
So incredibly important across the board for an awful lot of people.
The theatre and the arts in general is a social activity. We, you know, unless we're seriously into a particular playwright or a particular director, and none of our friends are, we tend not to make the effort to go on our own. We tend to go with friends. We tend to go with family. It is a social activity. And therefore, you know, I remember another show we did, it was a Theatre Love It show. A family of 5 went to see that show, husband, wife, 3 children, and they had brought their children to see the show because it was a children's show, being Theatre Love It. But in fact, it was the father who was deaf, and he had never been to a show with his kids. So these things are very important, but not just for necessarily for the people who maybe the show is targeted at, but actually for the group of people who go to see a show. It's very often the deaf people or the blind people or the you know, the hard of hearing people or the visually impaired people who go to a show, and we know they are there. We also count the people they go with, because it really gives you a better sense of what the benefit is.
Absolutely. I mean, theatre is inherently a shared experience, and everybody should be allowed or be able to share that experience with their friends or family just like that. An awful lot of artists and audiences even have adapted to engaging in content online and creating content online. What has your experience at ADI been with this?
Poor. To say, from an access point of view, it's poor. From a flexibility point of view, if you don't have an issue with access, it's amazing, because you can, I think suddenly the arts has become more internationalized without travel, and I actually think there are huge benefits in that.
Of course,
However, so I think there are opportunities arising for much broader conversations. However, having said that, I have been really the extent to which access has evaporated quite literally out of the arts since it went digital. It has more or less disappeared. It's very concerning. I was on a call recently with a group of museums and galleries from all over the place. And, you know, I was kind of quite shocked to hear, and these are very well intentioned, very good people who really want to do the right. But the language has changed so utterly in that now we are, and they were across the board, you know, people, groups that were described as being socially excluded or disadvantaged are now all vulnerable groups. We're all vulnerable. Uh, I I can see around the language in 9-10 weeks, kind of almost a medicalization of disability and of need and of risk. And I think it's going to take a long time to go back. In fact, talking to some colleagues in the arts and disability world and disability world more broadly, you know, people are saying that the social model in terms of language, the social model of disability may well have been taken back by a generation. And I kind of tend to believe that. I know people might say, well, you know, when we have over 1,600 people have died, 25,000 people in Ireland have contracted the coronavirus, language couldn't be the most important thing. You know, it seems a little bit shallow to be talking about it, but I actually think the type of language that has become part of everyday speech in the last 9 weeks will impact on how decisions are made about people's lives. And that's kind of why it matters. It will also make a difference on why people decide to respond and what they can do. And you know, prior to this, we were having I was trying to articulate a very different conversation, which takes me back to one of your earlier questions, which was that notion of, you know, are things improving around access? And yes, there's more access about. But one of the things I've been trying to activate a conversation around is there is public funding involved there, and therefore we have the ability that the arts is accessible to people. So I'm a great believer and would like to see more of the linking of the spending of public money or the receiving of public money being linked back to access, and actually that it be being that it is built into funding applications and funding allocations rather than being an add-on. A once-off performance is always going to be expensive to caption, to audio describe, to provide sign language for, but a repeat performance gets cheaper. But I do really believe that actually if people receive public money, then they have a responsibility to be accessible.
Yes, I completely agree with you there. And it's not an entirely off the wall idea when we've already got similar things in areas like housing, where contractors are obliged, if they're building a huge site of new homes, a percentage of those have to be given over to social housing. So there are, you know, there's precedent. So it's not an entirely crazy idea. And I completely agree with it. And I think it's something that I'd love to see as well going forward for sure. In saying all of that, your website is actually a great resource for the accessible online content that is out there. Now, a lot of it is, I've seen is not Irish. There's a good few of the Irish galleries and museums that have tours and stuff, which is fabulous. There's also an audio described ballet from New Zealand, which is just gorgeous. But has it been easy for you to find that content, or have you had to really go digging to find it?
We've had to go digging. And the trawl has had to be all over the world, quite literally. I think that's concerning. Now, having said that, in the next few weeks, you will see Arts and Disability Ireland announce, I'm hoping, a number of online workshops or webinars where we do some training around making work accessible. There are ways to make audio description happen as well. So there are approaches that can be taken. There is an advocacy element to the way Arts and Disability Ireland work, but I also think it's really important to work with the sector to show them what to do, and so that they can do it for themselves. And actually, one of the things that we have done in terms of putting in the effort to trawl the internet to see what is accessible is to get some really good examples of practice, but also to see from the organizations that are popping up in our feeds what isn't accessible, and then to kind of know this is where we need to fit in, this is where we could be most helpful.
You're right. It's a question of the tools and having the tools to do it and knowing how to do that. I'm very excited by the idea of ADI doing the webinars and training and all of that. That sounds great. Absolutely. Looking forward to when theatres and stuff are available, are allowed to reopen. And there's the possibility that there'll be further restrictions on audiences when they are allowed to reopen. I mean, is there a concern that this is going to further impede people with access requirements?
I think it will, and we're going to have to plan very carefully around that. Sighted guides can be very important in terms of being guided by an usher to your seat, to the bar, etc. How is that going to work? Guide dogs, as NCBI have pointed out, have never been trained to socially distance. They probably could be trained to socially distance, but they haven't. So therefore, they're to take their owner right to the front. They're going to crash on through, and that's just the way it works. There are going to be issues. The other thing is we've moved very quickly to a visual notice, so a visual awareness of space, much more so than was the case pre-COVID-19. So, for example, markings on the floor, signs that tell people how to circulate, one-way systems, etc., etc. Those are going to be quite hard for impaired and visually impaired people to navigate, and blind people not going to be able to navigate at all. There are a lot of people in Ireland who don't identify as being disabled. They're very uncomfortable about it. Many of them acquire a disability as they get older. Deafness is actually one of those very significant in terms of numbers that people acquire, and they become expert lip readers. Now, if we start to mask up people, lip reading won't work. And in fact, you may suddenly find yourself with colleagues who are going, what? 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 And actually, they still won't say they're deaf, but actually they won't be able to see a person's lips through a mask. And so, our visor is going to be a better option in certain situations. There are very subtle issues like that people aren't really thinking about yet. In fact, it's one of the things I've been quite heartened about in the arts is I don't hear that many people arguing against the public health measures. It's more how can we work with them and how can we be
Yeah,
viable with them. And actually,
yeah.
I think that's in comparison to some other sectors. I think we've been very responsible in that regard.
I mean, you've brought up a
Yeah,
whole host of things there that need to be talked about. Certainly, I mean, with social distancing, are they going to insist that, you know, it's one person at a time? As you said, that's not going to work if somebody needs to have an assistant with them or a guide dog, and all of those things that
yeah.
you've just spoken about. Absolutely. There's an awful lot to think about.
As an organisation, we are of 4 members of staff. We've continued to function, I would say, fairly seamlessly. At times, things are a little bit slower, but
Mm-hmm.
actually, you know, it has, you know, people, we've been able to manage our funding schemes. People have got paid, which is very important, and you know, artists have got their awards. Yes, I think the interaction and the real art happening in real spaces is really important, but that will come. I have no doubt about
Yeah.
that. But I do think certain things will be different. And I suppose the only thing I don't want to see being different is that we lose some of the gains that were gained in terms of access, and that in the
Mm.
digital world that we managed to get some of the access that we had in the real world into that digital world as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Pádraig, thank you so much for coming and speaking with me today. It's been absolutely fabulous, and hopefully down the road, once we're past all this, we might have an opportunity to do this in person, which would be lovely as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sunshine today.
Yes, okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Janice, and thank you to Pádraig and ADI for all of the great work that they're doing and for taking the time to come on Stage Door Live. We'll be posting links as usual to ADI's website after the show. Our next guest is Eleanor Walsh, a performer based in Dublin. Her recent credits include Dear Island, These Four Walls by Sinead Burke for the Abbey Theatre, What I Don't Know About Autism for the Abbey Theatre, and Veiled for the National Leprechaun Museum. Eleanor is a graduate of As I Am's youth leadership team and is also a member of Disabled Women Ireland. Welcome, Eleanor.
Hello there.
Hello, how are you this
Thank you
evening?
very much for having me, Amy. I'm
Very glad
very
to have
well, thank you. Lovely to be
you.
here.
Lovely to have you here. So my first question is, could you tell me and everyone watching a little bit about your journey to becoming an actor, your training and your experience in college, and also about the diagnosis that you received in your first year of your actor training in college?
So from Kilkenny, which is a great place to grow up if you're in any way creatively inclined.
Yeah.
So I was always interested in drama and theatre and the performing arts, and was very lucky that my parents were very supportive in my pursuing this. I was a member of Kilkenny Youth Theatre, which was part of Barnstorm Theatre Company, who were absolutely amazing, and it was great to be doing our youth theatre workshops downstairs in the barn, which is in their venue and rehearsal space, and then go upstairs and get to talk to like the professional actors who are rehearsing their shows. I remember one of whom was Shane O'Reilly, who's coming on this later. So cool. So then I followed a lot of Kilkenny actors to DIT drama, or TUD drama, TU Dublin, which was at the time, and I believe still is for hanging on there for the moment, in Rathmines, to study the drama performance BA on 3 years. And then about 2 weeks into my first month in my first year, I discovered my autism diagnosis, that I was autistic. And that was exhilarating and life-changing, because I suddenly was able to understand all these things about myself and why I struggled with certain things. And, you know, that there was a community of people out there all across the world who've used the world like I did. But then I realized that while there were these millions of autistic people around the world, I didn't know any in Dublin, where I was studying, and I did not know of any in the theatre or arts world in Dublin or in Ireland. And all of a sudden it became very scary. Because if it's very hard to imagine yourself somewhere if you can't see it, you know?
Did it ever make you doubt the industry that you wanted to go into, or did it make you believe that you should fight harder to be a part of that growth of representation?
That's a very good question. It never made me really want to turn away from pursuing theatre in Irish theatre, because I haven't really figured out yet what else it is that I can do, or that I'm meant for.
This seems to be working out, so you probably won't have to.
It was more a case of, okay, autism is, for the most part, an invisible disability, and I have a lot of privilege as well, that I have the ability to somewhat mask or pass as non-autistic, and that a lot of the reason why I can do that is because I'm, you know, because of the spaces I'm in, because of in this industry, I'm just assumed not to be autistic, because why would an autistic person be there? So it was more a case of, okay, I don't know of any autistic people, or even many disabled actors working in Irish theatre. Either there are none, scary, they are there, but they don't know, which is very plausible, because a lot of people don't find out until they're adults. Jodie O'Neill was one of those people. Or they are there, but they're masking and they're not telling anybody. And why is that? Are there reasons for that? So I had 3 years of not being able to ask anybody those questions, because I just didn't know where to go. And you know, you know, as a drama student, you know, you don't have the contacts or the power. So I decided I was going to mask, and that no one in the industry was going to know I was autistic for decades. And that worked out.
Well, it's so difficult when you're in that training environment, because there are all sorts of things that make you think, oh, is this going to affect my casting, or is that going to affect the opportunities I'm given? And in the industry, not just in training. So when did you decide to be open about autism? Was that while you were in DIT? Or was that once you had graduated and were forging your path in the industry?
That was a very slow process. So I suppose it kicked off when I became one of the first members of As I Am's youth leadership teams. As I Am, the national autism charity in Ireland, and they started. They assembled a ragtag team of misfits of young autistic people around Ireland to give them the skills to advocate for autistic issues. And before, I'd tried finding different groups of autistic adults that I could go and join or talk to, but all the groups were for parents of autistic people. So I didn't know any autistic people in real life. And then when I did, you know, and actually getting to talk about these things in real life, that marked a huge turning point. And then in my third year, I was able to help facilitate a relaxed performance of our graduate show, The Rover, in Samuel Beckett. And I wrote my thesis on relaxed performance. and autism friendly and sensory friendly theatre. And it was getting harder and harder to sort of play it off as me just being really interested in in autism and theatre. Although, of course, non-autistic people can, of course, have an interest in it and be our allies. But I suppose then when about 2 years after graduating, suddenly there was all these opportunities popping up where people wanted to make work about autistic people or for children with autism or special needs, and they wanted an authentic autistic voice helping them with it, or wanted to cast a neurodiverse actor. And I was working with As I Am at the time, actually, as their information officer, and I was getting these emails asking for, you know, for people, and I was able to reply and go, I could be the person. So that was very handy. And then when I joined As I Am as a member of staff, I mean, I was an autistic advocate from then on publicly, like that was it. And then because you see, when I started DIT in 2014, and just after that, Waking the Feminists kicked off, and then a few months after I graduated, Me Too kicked off. We weren't having the very interesting time to be studying drama. We weren't having the conversations about representation and diversity and inclusion that we're having now back in 2014. It's only a short time ago, and so much has changed. You know,
wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you mentioned relaxed performances a second ago. Would you tell, just for anyone that doesn't know what those are, would you talk a little bit about relaxed performances?
Yes, of course. So as Pádraig Naughton there mentioned, relaxed performances are a type of assisted performance that assist disabled patrons into with coming to the theatre and seeing a performance. Things like ISL interpreted, or a captioned performance, or an audio described performance. And a relaxed performance is primarily based at neurodivergent patrons, and it literally relaxes the rules of theatre going. So we mightn't realise it anymore, but there are a lot of unspoken rules when it comes to going and watching a play. So you go into this room and down with 100 strangers, and you have to sit there for 2 hours. If you go, you're not allowed to come back in, and you have to be quiet unless there's funny parts, in which case you can laugh. And you clap at the end, and you're not. And they're very regimented ways of expressing yourself in reaction to what's happening on stage. And that makes of those rules and those conventions and the importance that venues and audiences place in them can make theatre inaccessible for a lot of different people. Not only autistic people, or people with sensory processing differences, or people with learning and intellectual disabilities, but also people with Alzheimer's or dementia, people who've got a very loud cough, or a loud laugh, or long legs, or who get up and stand up and walk around every so often. So a relaxed performance, certain accommodations you might find in a relaxed performance include lighting and sound cues being changed or altered to be less intense for audience members from a sensory perspective. People might be able to come in and out as they need to. There might be a quiet area or a quiet space set up outside the auditorium where people can go and take a break if they need to. And people are allowed and even encouraged to stim or move and express themselves however it is that they need to, in reaction to what they are experiencing on stage. So there's, at the moment in Ireland, relaxed performances are most of the time limited to children's shows and shows for young people, families. The ARC have been doing relaxed performances for the last 10 years and consistently. Wow. And there's usually one relaxed performance as part of Dublin Theatre Festival every year, and that's a performance in the ARC of a children's show. And then there's usually relaxed performances around the country for the Christmas pantomime, because it is a huge social family tradition that as Pádraig was saying, you know, theatre is a social occasion, and especially something like the pantomime, which is a Christmas tradition, even if you don't go to the theatre the rest of the year. And, you know, you want to include the whole family. In my research for my thesis, a story that came up over and over was a family have an autistic child, and the parents bring them and their non-autistic siblings to a show. A nice family show, The Lion King, we'll call it. And yeah, I haven't actually seen it yet, so no spoilers.
Great.
And the show's going on, they're having a great time, something funny happens on stage, and the autistic child might laugh or start rocking in their seat because it's funny and they're happy, and that's normal for the family, but that's not normal for the person sitting beside them or in front of them or behind them. The family might start getting dirty looks or be told to, you know, keep their child quiet, or that they're not parenting properly, and then so an usher comes down, says there's complaints, that they have to leave, and then the family never go to the theatre again.
Yeah, and then we're limiting that family's exposure to arts for themselves and their children. Yeah, no, it's very true. We have a question from social media, which come up on the screen. Kevin, can you focus my image? So the question is, venues should look into making their space more accessible for disabled theatre makers while they are making changes to the space to make it a safe working environment after August 10th. That's more of a comment, but yes, that's very true. Do you agree? Would you agree with that, Eleanor, that these changes could be made to theatre spaces, seeing as changes are being made anyway for social distancing at the moment?
I very much agree that all theatre and rehearsal spaces should be more accessible for disabled theatre makers. There's been great strides in considering the access needs of disabled audience members and disabled patrons, but the industry has tended to forget that disabled people can also make theatre, or at least they could if they could get into the buildings. I think yes, disabled, theatres are often quite physically inaccessible, as are in a lot of cases drama schools and rehearsal spaces. So where I trained in DIT was a historical building, a listed building, and there were stairs everywhere in every direction that you wanted to go. And in my second year, actually, I ended up twisting my ankle really badly and was on crutches for the rest of the year. And all of a sudden, amongst my classmates, access was this issue. And before every class, they would come up to me, as I was trying to get up the stairs on my crutches, and be like, "Do you think you'll be able to do this class? Will they make you sit in the corner again? Oh, I wonder how they'll change it. Do you think you'll be able to cope?" And I found it very striking at the time that these questions that I would have to ask myself every day: this class be accessible for me, and if it wasn't, how was I going to get around it so I could do what I needed to do? Was all of a sudden a concern for everyone else in my class as well. But back to venues. I think when August 10th or whenever phase 5 comes about. Hopefully it is as soon as possible. I think as we start to make audiences feel more comfortable in theatre venues and start to figure out how we can draw audiences back to watching theatre, that we can try and start to include all of our voices. And yeah.
And how important to you is it to you to be identified as neurodivergent within the industry? Do you feel that there's any responsibility or pressure on you to be speaking out about your experiences?
That's a really good question. I think that I had intended when I started my training that I would not, I wouldn't be known as autistic or neurodivergent until it was safe, whatever that means for a career in the arts. And
because we're never safe, really, are we?
yeah, that's how you could tell I was in my first year. But, so I am an autistic self-advocate as well. And at this stage in my life, there's very little difference between my theatre work, my work in the arts, and my work for the community. Even though, as I said before, I have an invisible disability, and before what I don't know about autism, I'd been acting for 13 years, and that was the first time I'd ever played an autistic character. So I'd only been playing neurotypical non-autistic people, and I can do that.
Limited.
So my fear is that I wouldn't want to be limited to playing autistic people. The main reason for that is because the parts aren't there. The parts aren't there for disabled people in general, or if they are there, it's non-disabled actors who are cast as them, and then what are disabled actors meant to do? But hopefully, as Aisling was saying, this was going to be a banner year for inclusive theatre. And I think that I've seen in the UK a lot of theatre makers over there who come from marginalised groups worried that when theatres reopen again, in a rush to gather much needed funds, the theatres will go straight for the shows and the actors that are going to make money and be a little afraid to take risks for the next while. And there's a thinking of, we just got our foot in the door, we just got our seat at the table, are we going to lose it? I don't know how much of a concern that is in Ireland, although I don't blame anybody for thinking it. But I'm going to be a neurodivergent autistic person for life. I think nothing about us without us is an important saying in the disability community for a reason. And I think so yeah, it is really important now that I am considered an autistic and neurodivergent theatre maker, and that also that if anyone has any questions or isn't sure what that means, that they ask me what that means for me.
Yeah.
I did it.
Do you find that people are comfortable asking you questions, or do you find people get nervous around it at all?
I think that sometimes people are a little embarrassed to ask questions. It wouldn't be, depending on the context, it wouldn't depending on the context, it wouldn't be the first thing that I would say about myself, because I think there is one of the things that maybe blocks or prevents people from casting disabled actors is worries about access and worries about ability. And oftentimes people worry about these things and that it inform their decisions without asking the necessary questions, without asking a disabled actor that they have in mind. So, if we're rehearsing in this place, how will that affect you? Or what changes, if necessary, do we need to make so that you can participate fully in this to the best of your ability? And I think that inclusion or disabled inclusion in theatre and in the arts, any lack of it or any barrier is mostly, not because of any sort of evil Tory plot. There's enough of that in the rest of society.
Yeah.
It's just down to lack of education and people not wanting to offend anybody, which is lovely. But I think thanks to, and again, even this episode is making a huge difference in getting disabled performers and disabled theatre makers getting their voices out there and letting people know that there are such a thing as disabled theatre makers.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll be easier to ask those questions.
Yeah, I hope so. I think we do definitely. There are a lot of conversations that need to be had about a lot of things globally and within our industry. And I feel like maybe that's one positive of the COVID situation, is that this pause has really given people the time to maybe engage with conversations that they wouldn't otherwise have engaged with. So hopefully we can continue and not. That what you said earlier about the fear that commercial theatre and just the need to make money as quickly as possible for the theatres will overtake the opportunities that were coming to light for neurodivergent groups and disability groups. Hopefully they will not be left behind in the dust amid people just trying to make back that money.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much, Eleanor, for joining us and for talking to us about your experience. I think that will have made quite a lot of people understand something that they probably didn't before. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Here to share their art in isolation is Terri Donovan, an actor and a writer who is currently in the Lir Academy completing her training, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself and her experiences.
Hi, my name is Terri Donovan. I'm a second year actor at the Lir Academy and I'm from Stockport, which is in the UK. My sign-name is this, and a little audio description of myself for visually impaired people is I am a white person with short brown hair in a ponytail. I'm wearing a white striped shirt and some very colourful dungarees. So I was applying to drama school for 5 years before I was lucky enough to get into the Lir. And I think the main reason why I applied to the Lir was because of Brexit, which sounds kind of silly, but I'd always wanted to study in Europe, and with Brexit looming ahead, I thought, right, this is my last chance. So I thought, right, I'll apply to the Lir. But I think the main reason why I ended up choosing the Lir was because, so in the audition, you in your second round you have a workshop, a Shakespeare workshop with Hilary Wood, who is the head of acting at the Lir. And in this workshop, she would kind of get people up and get them to work on their speeches. And I was lucky enough to sit by her and kind of watch these people. And the way she worked, I just knew that I needed to have her as a teacher. I had worked previously in various different acting jobs, quite by accident, and I had trained on a foundation course. I also trained on the Grey Eye Ensemble's training programme for disabled people. But I knew that I really needed the training. Even after doing these jobs, I felt like there was something that I needed to work on in myself. And so when it came to me coming to the profession properly, I could really deliver what I wanted to deliver. I mean, the particular challenges of being a disabled person in drama school. I think everyone who is disabled or who is neurodivergent, who has a chronic illness like me, will know that it can really differ on a day-to-day basis. I mean, sometimes on the worst days, it can feel almost impossible to get out of bed. But I think what the Lir really has is it's institutionally, it's so kind, which I don't think you can look down upon from an institution. And even the teachers who I have the privilege of being trained by, they are really generous with how they give us the information that they've learned after so many years. And like in particular, for example, you have Sue Ivan, who is the head of movement, and she always says that don't go over the red line, Terri, like you need to like look after yourself. And she can kind of see through your soul in a way. She can kind of look at you and go, no, you've gone too far today in terms of what you can manage with your pain. Or even with like the voice exercises that we have to do in our voice classes. Cathal is really generous in the fact that he kind of lets me change the exercise slightly so it can really suit my body and that I can really access it in a way that I can feel like I am getting the best out of this lesson. So the training has been particularly affected by this pandemic in a way that means I've been able to come home to Stockport, been able to get on a bike and smash my teeth in, which was not smart, but might be an insight into the dyspraxic life that I have. But it has meant that we have been able to really explore what it means to kind of perform on programs like Zoom. So for example, us second years, we just did our Irish Rep project. Our class did A Shadow of a Gunman, and I was lucky enough to play Mrs. Henderson, and we were directed by the brilliant Conor Morrison, and we were really able to explore the language that OKC kind of delves into, and we were able to really get our teeth into it, which we would have been able to do in a live theatre situation, but in being narrowed down into this kind of framework, we were really able to get the nooks and crannies of how that language is used in his beautiful text. So yes, that was very exciting. And we're about to go into full-time classes at the Lir, so it's going to be really intriguing to see how those different classes are explored online. But so far it's going pretty well, which is pretty exciting. I think what I'd really challenge the Irish industry to look at is, in particular for casting directors, for producers, to really look at the disabled talent, the deaf and disabled talent out there. I mean, there's so much of it. There's so much potential to explore, And I think what really needs to happen is for these gatekeepers of the industry to kind of take an active approach into finding this deaf and disabled talent and really nurture it and kind of be able to place them in the roles that they deserve to be in. I mean, it is fantastic that shows like Things I Don't Know About Autism was on at the Abbey recently, and that is brilliant. The fact that that was written by an autistic woman and was portrayed by autistic people on a main national stage, that is brilliant, and I'm so supportive of that. And more shows like that should be done, where there's so much potential in what we can do as deaf and disabled performers. And even like, so for example, I audio describe myself at the beginning of this, and we can incorporate audio description and captioning in a really creative way into your work from the start of the process. So getting writers, getting deaf and disabled writers and producers and directors, and really getting them from a start of a process and kind of working their way towards making really beautiful, brilliant, fantastically observed work. That is something I would really love to see more of in the Irish industry. Thank you so much.